There are moments in the life of every believer when heaven feels still. Not peaceful. Not silent in the way a soft night is silent. But silent like a locked door. Like a voice that once whispered now chooses to retreat into shadow. You pray. You fast. You search the word over and over. You whisper in the dark, God, where are you? But all you hear is the echo of your own voice. And in that sacred ache, a terrifying thought tries to sneak in. Has God forgotten me? You're not alone. That question has walked through the hearts of the faithful for generations. Even David, the man after God's own heart, once cried in Psalm 13 verse 1, How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? Those words, written in anguish, are proof that divine silence is not a modern struggle. It is ancient, holy, mysterious, and more common than we admit. But what if God's silence is not his absence? What if it is, in fact, a different language of heaven, a language not made of words, but of trust? What if he is still speaking, just not the way we're used to hearing? Think of a teacher during a final exam. The room is silent, but the silence isn't neglect, it's sacred. It's the moment when what has already been taught is meant to be lived. The teacher hasn't left the classroom. They are watching, with purpose. Not to abandon, but to allow growth. Sometimes, God's silence is not a punishment. It's permission. Permission to walk in what you already know. Permission to believe without seeing. Permission to trust that he is still near, even when he is quiet. Remember the disciples on the stormy sea? The wind howling. Waves crashing. Fear rising like a flood. And Jesus, asleep in the boat. The silence felt unbearable. The storm felt like a threat. And yet, the one who calms the sea lay still, not because he didn't care, but because he was showing them something deeper. His silence wasn't neglect. It was sovereignty. God doesn't always explain his silence, but he never wastes it. The silence of heaven is not empty space, it is filled with divine intention. It is the pause that prepares the heart, the hush that sharpens your hearing, the stillness that draws you out of fear and into faith. This journey we are about to walk together is not about forcing God to speak louder. It is not about demanding answers from the heavens. It is about something far more sacred. It is about learning to interpret the stillness. Learning to feel his presence in what seems like absence. To hear his heart in the spaces between the words. And to remember, when God is silent, he is still speaking to you. Let your heart breathe. Let your soul settle. The silence isn't empty. It's pregnant with meaning. And by the end of this journey, you'll see that the silence was never meant to hurt you. It was meant to draw you closer. There is a kind of suffering that doesn't show on the surface. A quiet grief. A spiritual weight that presses on the chest but leaves no bruise. It's the ache of those who love God deeply, but feel forgotten. Who worship with trembling hands, pray through clenched teeth, and still wake up wondering, why does he feel so far away? It's the hidden sorrow of the faithful, those who aren't walking in rebellion, but obedience, yet heaven seems closed. They've surrendered. They've believed. They've stayed. But all they feel is delay. Distance. Dissonance. And they don't say it out loud, but the question burns behind their worship, what am I doing wrong? The pain behind the silence is real. and dangerous. Because when God feels quiet, the enemy gets loud. Doubts begin to whisper. Lies take root. Maybe I'm not enough. Maybe I missed His will. Maybe He's disappointed in me. Maybe He's gone. But hear this, you are not forgotten. You are not unloved. You are not disqualified. Job, the man called blameless and upright by God Himself, walked through this valley. In Job 23 verses 8 to 10, he confesses, I go forward, but He is not there, and backward, but I do not perceive Him. But He knows the way that I take. When He has tested me, I will come forth as gold. Do you hear it? The tension, the confusion, the ache, and still, the trust. This is the invitation of divine silence. Not to perform harder. Not to search for sin where there is none. But to trust deeper. To understand that when God feels absent, He is often refining what words cannot reach. It is not rejection. It is transformation. Spiritual silence is not the evidence of distance. It is the furnace of intimacy. It burns away our need for constant reassurance. It strips our faith of dependency on feelings. It deepens what shallow comfort never could. So if your soul feels abandoned, know this, you're standing in sacred ground. The silence may hurt, but it is not empty. It is God's way of drawing you beyond emotion into endurance. Beyond sensation into surrender. Beyond noise into knowing. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. And even if your prayers echo back in silence, even if your tears seem to fall into the void, heaven is not deaf. God is not absent. He is closer than breath, watching the furnace, holding the time, whispering to your spirit, you are mine, even here. Especially here. There's a kind of listening that doesn't happen with the ears. A kind of speaking that doesn't sound like words. And if we only expect God to speak the way we want, with thunder, with clarity, with certainty, we may miss the voice that's already moving through the stillness. Because when God is silent, He is not absent. He is speaking, just not always in the language we expect. Elijah once waited for the voice of the Lord in the chaos of wind, the shaking of an earthquake, and the blaze of fire. But God wasn't in the dramatic. He came in a whisper, so soft that Elijah had to lean in, had to still his heart, had to listen differently. 1 Kings 19 verses 11 to 12. Maybe that's what God is inviting you to do now. Not to hear louder, but to hear deeper. Sometimes His silence is divine Morse code. A sacred rhythm of hidden messages, not for the distracted, but for the devoted. That repeated verse that keeps showing up. That strange dream that won't leave your heart. That moment when peace wraps around your confusion like a warm blanket you didn't expect. These are whispers. Echoes. Divine signals meant to guide you when no clear word is spoken. Creation speaks, if you'll pause long enough to see it. The stars declare His order. The sunrise reminds you He never forgets to begin again. Even a closed door might be His voice, saying, not here. Not now. Trust me. The Spirit of God does not always shout over your fears. Sometimes, He simply waits, until the noise fades. Until the soul is quiet enough to sense His presence, not just seek His instruction. This is why spiritual maturity isn't about always hearing something new. It's about learning to recognize what God is already saying in ways we've ignored. Silence isn't a void, it's a veil. and the mature heart learns to see through it. So ask yourself, could it be that God is speaking in the rhythm of your waiting? Could it be that your restlessness is holy? That your disappointment is a redirected grace? That the moment you stopped feeling Him, He began forming you? Don't measure God's presence by your emotions. Measure it by your attentiveness. Because silence is not empty. It's full of hints, impressions, movements, and sacred echoes. But you have to listen differently. You have to lean in. God hasn't stopped speaking. He's just teaching you a quieter language. One that your spirit, not your senses, can understand. One of the deepest wounds a believer can carry is the quiet conclusion that God's silence means He's displeased, that the quiet must be a sign He's turned away. It's a subtle lie, but it seeps in slowly, when prayers seem unanswered, when emotions grow numb, when heaven feels closed. We start to whisper to ourselves, maybe I failed. Maybe I missed it. Maybe He's done with me. But silence is not rejection. It's not abandonment. It's not proof that you've fallen short. In fact, often, it's the opposite. Consider Lazarus. When Jesus heard he was sick, the scripture says something strange. He loved them, so He stayed where he was 2 more days. John 11 verses 5-6. He loved them, so He waited. He delayed not because He didn't care, but because He was preparing something deeper, greater, more eternal than a quick fix. His delay wasn't absence. It was intentional love working in hidden ways. This is the pattern of God, not always urgent, but always purposeful. His silence isn't a cold shoulder. It's often the silence of preparation, of testing, of refinement. Not punishment, but process. And spiritual immaturity interprets delay as disapproval. But maturity learns to stay. To believe that the one who seems silent is still sovereign. That love doesn't always speak, sometimes it waits, so the heart can grow stronger. It's like a parent watching a child take their first steps. The instinct is to run and catch them every time they wobble. But sometimes, the parent stands still, not out of cruelty, but to teach strength. The silence is not distance, it's trust. Trust that the child will rise. Trust that the fall is not failure. Trust that the process is part of the plan. This is how God forms you. Not just with words, but with silence that calls your faith deeper. Not faith in the outcome, but faith in His character. So if you're walking through a season where heaven seems still, if your soul has gone hoarse from calling out, remember this: the silence does not mean He has left. It means He is forming something in you that noise would only drown out. Don't confuse His stillness with His absence. Don't mistake His quiet with rejection. God is still with you, working, weaving, preparing. And if you can stand in the silence and still say, I trust you, then something eternal is happening in your soul. Something only silence could bring forth. The whisper of God is easily missed, not because it's rare, but because it's quiet. Quiet beneath the surface of our lives. Beneath the rush. Beneath the noise. Beneath the expectations we don't even realize we carry. We live in a world that rewards volume, rewards urgency, rewards those who are loud and fast and always producing. But the language of heaven, it doesn't compete with noise. It waits for stillness. And that's the tragedy. Not that God stops speaking, but that we become too distracted to notice. We want Him to speak in flashes of lightning, in audible signs, in emotion that stirs us to tears. But what if His Word is already present, and it's our spiritual ears that are not tuned? Isaiah 30 verse 15 says, "In quietness and confidence shall be your strength." But how often do we run from quietness? How often do we fill the space with noise, just so we don't have to feel the ache of silence? Yet that silence, that pause, that sacred stillness, it's not empty. It's full. Full of the presence of a God who speaks not always with sound, but with presence. Not always with answers, but with peace. The danger is subtle. We create expectations of how God should speak. Through emotion. Through breakthrough. Through open doors. And when He doesn't move on our terms, we assume He's not moving at all. We miss the voice in the gentle wind because we were waiting for the earthquake. Just like Elijah in the cave, who expected fire and storm, but encountered God in a whisper. That whisper still speaks. It speaks in the unease you feel when something isn't right. It speaks in the scripture that won't leave your mind. It speaks in the closed door that, though painful, protected you. It speaks in the restlessness that pushes you to pray even when nothing is wrong. And yes, it speaks in the silence that draws you into surrender. Spiritual stillness is not passive. It is not resignation. It is radical attentiveness. The kind that leans in and says, "I don't need fireworks. I just want you." And that heart, that posture, here's what the noisy heart never could. So ask yourself, is God silent? Or have you been too distracted to hear? Is He withholding, or are you waiting for Him to show up your way, instead of trusting the way He already has? The invitation isn't to force God to speak louder. It's to quiet your soul enough to hear Him whisper. Because that whisper, it's always speaking to those who are willing to listen differently. There is a kind of silence that feels like exile. Like you've been sent to the back of the line. Forgotten. Set aside. You look around and see others rising, others hearing from God, others walking in clarity, while your own life feels wrapped in delay and fog. But what if the wilderness is not rejection, but refinement? What if the silence is not God turning away, but God drawing you in? The Bible does not hide this pattern. Over and over, we see God lead His chosen ones into silent places before releasing them into public calling. Moses tended sheep in Midian for 40 years, not because God had changed His mind, but because preparation takes time. Joseph was thrown into a prison after being given a dream. David was anointed as king, then ran for his life through caves. And Jesus, the Son of God, spent 40 days in a desert, alone, tempted, and silent, before He ever performed a single miracle. Deuteronomy 8 verse 2 tells us why: to humble you and test you in order to know what was in your heart. You see, the silence is not about punishment. It's about the proving of the heart. Because anyone can worship when they feel God, but who will worship when they don't? Anyone can walk in purpose when the voice of God is loud, but who will keep walking when all they hear is stillness? Think of a seed. Buried in soil. Surrounded by darkness. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. No growth. No progress. No fruit. But deep beneath the surface, something holy is taking place. Roots are forming. Foundations are being laid. And those roots, they can only grow in the quiet. Because depth never happens in the spotlight. This is the sacred rhythm of heaven: first the wilderness, then the calling. First the silence, then the commission. And if you're in a season where everything feels still, where the heavens feel closed, where you wonder if you've been disqualified, listen closely. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked. You are not left behind. You are being made ready. What seems like divine delay is often divine design. God is shaping you for what He's about to release. He's removing the noise, teaching your heart to listen, forming in you a faith that does not depend on feeling. So lean into the silence. Embrace the wilderness. Because in that stillness, if you dare to be still long enough, you'll hear it, the wilderness whisper. The quiet voice that says, I am with you. I am preparing you. And soon, I will send you. And when that moment comes, you'll rise not in your own strength, but in the strength of one who has walked through the silence and come out with roots deep enough to carry the weight of the calling. There comes a point in the soul's journey where the question is no longer, God, are you speaking? But rather, Lord, am I still enough to hear you? The longer we walk with Him, the more we discover that God's voice is not always thunder and earthquake. Sometimes, it's a whisper so soft that only stillness can catch it. Psalm 46 verse 10 says, Be still, and know that I am God. Not do more. Not pray louder. Not perform harder. Just be still. Because in the stillness, something shifts. In the quiet, we begin to sense that the silence was never empty, it was filled with presence. Filled with love. Filled with the breath of a God who speaks not only in answers but in waiting. Remember the storm? The disciples panicked as the wind roared and the waves crashed, but Jesus slept. He didn't sleep because He didn't care, He slept because He wasn't afraid. His silence was not weakness. It was sovereignty. It was His way of asking, will you trust my presence even when you can't trace my hand? And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you're straining to hear what comes next. Maybe you've prayed the same prayer over and over and the heavens feel sealed. Maybe the silence has made you question everything, your faith, your worth, your purpose. But hear this, God's silence is not a sign of His absence. It's an invitation to deeper trust. You don't need a louder God. You need a quieter soul. A soul that leans in when it doesn't understand. A soul that doesn't demand, but listens. A soul that knows that the same God who thundered from Mount Sinai also whispers in the cave of your waiting. So today, lean in. Not with fear, but with expectancy. Not with panic, but with peace. Because the silence is speaking. It's saying, I am still here. It's saying, I am still working. And it's whispering what your heart most needs to hear. You are not alone. I have not forgotten you. I am preparing you for more than you can imagine. This is not the end of your story. It's the pause before the page turns. And sometimes, the silence of God is not the absence of speech, it's the sound of trust being built in your spirit. Wait well. Trust deep. Lean in. He's still speaking. And if you listen close, you'll hear Him.